Hello and welcome to the Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Carlotta Rebello. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll be bringing you some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage on Monocle Radio, with highlights from our studios here at Midori House in London and from around the world. This week, EU ambassadors approve a new sanctions package towards Russia.
They do need to do something more demonstrative in supporting Ukraine, more effective in depriving Russia of profits from trade of some kind with the outside world.
Then Vladimir Putin is inaugurated once again as Russia's president, and we report on the student protests in the US.
The US has seen a gradual move towards the privatization of space because of a greater dependency on private capital to create public spaces. This has meant that there are fewer and fewer places for people to gather and make a significant impact without avoiding disruption.
Plus, Zagreb's weird museums, reports from the Eurovision Song Contest, and we flick through the new book, London Feeds Itself. That's all ahead over the next hour, here on The Curator, with me, Carlotta Rebello. So welcome to The Curator. EU ambassadors met this week in Brussels to discuss a new round of sanctions on Russia. We got the latest with Michael Binion, a foreign affairs specialist for The Times, who joined us from London, and from Brussels by Koen Verhelst, who's a trade reporter for Politico Europe.
We never quite know how the Hungarian ambassador will vote because Hungary has been firmly opposed to many of the sanctions and has gone along only reluctantly with many of the EU measures trying to help Ukraine. So it's not quite clear whether he will simply be outvoted or whether he will not cast a vote or how he will decide. But generally, all the others are united in feeling that they do need to do something more demonstrative in supporting Ukraine, more effective in depriving Russia of profits from trade of some kind with the outside world.
And Koen, with those intentions in mind, what do we expect this package to involve?
So one of the things is that LNG, liquefied natural gas, is still exported from Russia. This is not sanctioned at all currently, and this is imported by Belgium and Spain, for instance, and France as well. And in those countries, it's put into different ships and then exported elsewhere to third countries outside the EU. So this is a thing that the European Commission, sort of the day-to-day let's say, executive branch, they have proposed to stop this, to say, okay, these transshipments, they need to end. You know, we can still import maybe some liquefied natural gas from Russia for our own needs if we need to, fix our stocks for the coming winter. But this transshipment really needs to end. And then there's a couple of smaller measures as well.
It's very surprising that, if most people thinking this we all know the problems with the energy transition in Europe. When I saw that France, Belgium and Spain were still reliant on Russian gas, I thought it was for domestic purposes. But you're saying it's just purely for export. Why have they not sort of closed that down already?
It's not purely for export. And Spain has a lot of LNG terminals. They also then re-export it to Italy or to Germany, for instance. So there is a lot of internal haggling. But yeah, indeed, like a big chunk of what comes in through these liquefied gas ships, that actually goes to third countries. And the trick is, of course, that, it's been a very lucrative business for industries in those countries. And, they still need gas often to run industrial processes. So there is still a need for gas in Europe. There's been such a reliance for so long, especially on the manufacturing side, that this is something that is not so easily switched away from.
Michael, EU firms would also possibly be banned from investing in new gas projects in Russia. Would this have much of an impact, or could they turn to other allies like China to supply this?
I think the Russians have already discounted the idea that there's going to be any EU investment or any major energy company hoping to help Russia in its construction of new gas facilities. So I think they will already be looking elsewhere. China, possibly, yes, because the majority of regular gas from Russia is now being switched to China, if possible, and to other countries such as India and other places willing to take the gas. The Russians have a certain amount of pretty good technology of their own for this, but they can easily look for expert help from elsewhere. And I think they're certainly not counting on either EU investment funds or EU expertise to set up any new terminals and plants that they need to.
And Michael, ambassadors will also discuss restrictions for political parties accepting money from Russia and its proxies. How much of an issue is this right now across the continent?
Well, it's rather peculiar. I mean, these funds for political parties are pretty much clandestine in any case. Most political parties are rather shy about announcing how much Kremlin money they're taking. But it's known that Russia has supported particularly far right-wing groups. For some reason, they seem to think that the right wing, well, which is proving true, is less hostile to Russia and more friendly to Russian aims in Ukraine than most other political parties. How much has been going to them, it's not clear. And certainly how much is going to media companies in Western Europe is also not clear. The amounts can't be very big. I mean, certainly there were quite a large amount of funds going to, Marine Le Pen, for example. Her party, National Rally, has been receiving Russian money, but I think that's pretty much dried up now.
And Kuhn, as mentioned there are several media outlets that are going to face sanctions. What do we know about these and what have they been putting out?
The most high profile of these is Voice of Europe. This is an outlet that was based up until recently in the Czech Republic, and the Czech Secret Service basically raided the offices and said, hey, this is a propaganda, a disinformation outlet financed and directed from Russia by the Kremlin. And it looked like a legitimate news site. And the Czechs have also said, and this is really what has informed this discussion on financing for political parties, is that they claim that politicians in Belgium and also in the Netherlands and potentially in other countries have been receiving money through Voice of Europe to basically tout Kremlin talking points, like just say, oh, NATO expanded too fast, or Ukraine is fascist, these kind of things. And there have on top of that, and this is separate, I should note, but there have been some investigations in a German far-right politician recently who is in the European Parliament. One of his assistants got arrested, for instance, on suspicion on spying for China. So there are a few of these issues that have cropped up in recent weeks. And then, of course, on top of that, in a few weeks' time, about a month from now, all of Europe will head to the polls to vote for a new European Parliament for the next 5 years. So the timing is of the essence to make clear to European parties all over the continent that they cannot accept any money from the Kremlin.
Now, Russia also said its troops are to carry out drills to practice for the possible use of nuclear weapons on the battlefield. Monocle's Emma Nelson was joined by Jenny Mathers, who's a senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University.
So these drills are different from the strategic nuclear drills because the strategic nuclear weapons are basically at high combat readiness. But for tactical nuclear weapons, they have to do a lot more to pull them all together. So we're going to see a lot more activity. So things being taken from the warehouses, different components being put together. So there's going to be a lot more busyness around it, which I think actually is part of the signal that Putin wants to send. He wants there to be a visible series of actions to back up his rhetoric. And this is a way of saying, look, we're serious with, to the West, back off, stop what you're planning to do and think again.
What kind of missiles would they be launching and where?
Well, the idea is that these are tactical nuclear weapons. So in theory, they are suitable for use on the battlefield. They're meant to have a low yield. They're meant to only affect a small area. Now, this is a bit of a nonsense, really, because any use of nuclear weapons at any level, any size, is going to be absolutely catastrophic, and we don't know where it would lead. And so, yes, there is a bit of a fiction about making this distinction between what is tactical and what is strategic. But nevertheless, the idea is that Russia could choose to use these basically in Ukraine to have a relatively limited impact.
What would Russia, I think we could probably more specifically say, what would Vladimir Putin consider to be a red line that would prompt the use of such weapons?
Well, his red lines have shifted a lot over the past 2 and a bit years. So it's gone everything from, the West supplying tanks to Ukraine, which clearly that's already happened, to various kinds of missiles, which has already happened, to F-16s, which is happening. And now it's really saying that, the West should not be giving a green light to Ukraine to use Western-supplied weapons against the territory of Russia, but also, sort of pushing back against Macron's recent statements that, perhaps NATO member states would have to provide troops on the ground. So it's really, we don't know what the red lines are, basically. But what he wants to do is to continue to use these threats of nuclear weapons, which he has been using throughout, to tell the West, back off. The risk is too high. I might just do this. You don't know. I'm unpredictable. So don't go anywhere near where you think my red lines might possibly be.
I mean, there is some diplomacy going on behind the scenes. The fact, the purpose of this is, the back off message. But the United Kingdom's, I think the British ambassadors to the foreign ministry has been hauled into Moscow to warn that if UK supplied weapons are used in strikes on Russian territory by the Ukrainians, that there will be some sort of retaliation to this. I mean, where does this fit in the sort of in the nuclear element, or is this a separate problem?
I think the lines are definitely blurred, and they're deliberately blurred. Because when a state makes a claim that, there will be consequences to this action or that action, they tend deliberately to leave it unspecified, to give themselves the maximum amount of flexibility, but also to allow that imagination among their opponents to do its work. And so we can just imagine what could Putin think of doing to the UK, and it can range anything from, slapping on economic sanctions, throwing out a few diplomats, or, nuclear weapons use. Who knows? So this is deliberate. It's part of the messaging. It's part of the overall positioning and posturing that Putin is making, really to try and decrease support for Ukraine from the West.
And the fact that this announcement or these rumblings have arrived around the same time as Putin's re-election parade, I mean, is there a coincidence there, or is there something a little bit more thought out?
I think that there are a lot of things reinforcing each other. All right. So Putin has just been re-inaugurated again for the fifth time. We've got, Victory Day celebrations coming up tomorrow, marking the anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And we've got, responses to all of these moves and rhetoric on the part of Western countries. So I think a lot of things are building up and sort of contributing to each other.
And also another piece of the jigsaw is the presence of Xi Jinping of China in Europe this week, in Paris, in Belgrade, and then he goes off to Hungary afterwards. I mean, China has pledged a no-limits alliance with Russia. What influence could she have, or just explain the timing a little bit more about the significance of this visit and what the effect it could have with Putin?
Right. So, Xi's visit, I think, is really important in terms of how we see China developing its relationship with Russia, how we see China as a key figure in relation to the war in Ukraine. So China wants to make sure that its position is maximally flexible, right? So it's providing a lot of support for Russia behind the scenes in terms of weapons components or components that can be used in weapons, in terms of diplomatic cover. But it's also taking a big advantage of Russia in terms of, buying Russian energy at knockdown prices. And really, China definitely has the upper hand in this relationship with Russia. So as far as China is concerned, it would be embarrassing and humiliating if Russia were to lose in Ukraine. But on the other hand, China is almost certainly a restraining force and would certainly not be happy if Russia were to use nuclear weapons.
You're listening to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Carlotta Rebello. Now, Dominic Cummings is a name you may remember from both Brexit and the Boris Johnson government here in the UK. Well, he's back and reportedly wants to set up a new political party. Monocle Radio regular and associate fellow at Chatham House, Quentin Peel, gave us the latest.
He's been going on about this for a little while. I think he first mentioned it last year in an online column because essentially he says the Conservative Party is going to implode. He's right about that. The Conservative Party is going to just crash at the next election. And then I think there will be a battle royal for the spoils. And that's where he wants to get involved. He says he's got something called the Startup Party that will take over from the Conservative Party. It's not going to have Nigel Farage as a member. It's not going to be the Brexit Party, but it will be an anti-establishment party. So he's right about the Conservative Party, and I think he's wrong about his own party, because he's just too crazy, too poisonous for anybody to want to follow him.
Well, let's break some of that down. I mean, it's one thing to have ideas and a policy platform, but ultimately you have to have people to put up to be elected, and Britain's system is first past the post. It's incredibly hard to hack into. We have two very dominant main parties. I mean, what are the chances of him recruiting? Who might he get on board, and how likely could they actually make any ground? Because it's all at the end of the day about having these huge networks of volunteers and local parties in constituencies around the country.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't see him. He's not a popular figure. In fact, he's a profoundly unpopular figure. He's brilliant. There's no question about it. And he's a brilliant tactician. So if he could attach himself to a popular figure, indeed somebody like Nigel Farage, then it might work. Breaking into the first-past-the-post system is always going to be really difficult, and we've seen it with the Greens, the Lib Dems, and indeed the Brexit Party. You know, they never quite get what their vote says. So it's very difficult. But the Conservative Party, I mean, just imagine the situation. Say the Conservative Party has total meltdown, ends up with, you know, just number of MPs in two figures, 30, 40, something like that, then I think there would be a lot to play for. And the other thing that is breaking up, if you like, the first-past-the-post system is the rise of national parties like the Scottish National Party and the Welsh Party and so on. So you've got a fragmentation of politics happening, and therefore there might be a possibility. But as I say, it ain't going to be Dominic Cummings.
Well, yeah, I mean, Dominic Cummings is one of the person who is, it's always you, not me. He seems to have fallen out at various points with everyone involved with him. But I'm really curious about the platform that he's going after, because he says he's been conducting poll groups and he's come up with some ideas like closing he says, you know, the tax benefits for the 1% and having a stronger policy on immigration. Do you think he's tapping into something here, that he's getting something that just the mainstream parties aren't getting about the frustrations of the majority of British people?
Well, I think there are people trying to get at exactly those issues. So, anti-immigration, clearly that's part of the Reform Party's agenda. It's also part of the right wing of the Tory Party agenda. And yes, he basically wants to completely overhaul and indeed smash the civil service. That's a different issue. And I think that's an issue where he'd be hard put to make much headway. So he will appeal perhaps to the Brexit voting working classes. That's the red wall constituents. But he won't appeal to people who always voted Conservative precisely because it was the establishment party. I mean, he's part of that establishment. You know, his uncle was a Lord not Chief Justice, but a senior judge.
Boarding school educated,
and he
went to Oxbridge,
privately educated.
Was a spaz.
Absolutely, yeah. So, he's got one slightly strange thing in his background, which he spent 3 years working in Russia, apparently to set up an airline which never got off the ground. Nobody knows quite what he was doing there.
Not suspicious at all. And just finally, we've had Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, down today talking about the small boats situation and scrapping the Rwanda policy that the Conservatives have so far failed to get working, putting the money towards cracking gangs in Europe. I mean, for those outside the UK, the way our system works is it's in the Prime Minister's discretion when to call an election. We all think it will probably be in October, November time. As it stands, I mean, the Conservatives, is there anything now that they could do in the next few months that might save them from what sounds like a really crushing defeat, which could be existential in some ways, particularly if afterwards they tack and perhaps have their own Corbyn moment where they go to the extreme of the party and have someone like Suella Braverman as their next leader? Yeah,
I mean, I think that is something that's going to be very difficult for them to avoid, because I think fundamentally what's wrong with the Conservative Party is not policy, it's incompetence. That really undermined what they'd always been elected for, that they were the people who got on with government and kept the show on the road. Actually, the combination of just a series of failed prime ministers, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak, although he's quite sensible, actually just doesn't seem to be able to make a breakthrough. So I think that actually there's very little they can do about it, which is precisely why we're seeing all these members of parliament leaving the party, rats deserting a sinking ship.
Also this week, we enlisted the help of New York-based journalist Karina Choi to give us an update on the United States college campus protests and to assess how cities around the US allow for or restrict public protest.
Protests calling for U.S. universities to divest from firms supporting Israel's war in Gaza have spread across the country, prompting police to remove and arrest students who've set up encampments and occupied university property over the past few weeks. At Columbia, just a few blocks away from where I'm based in Morningside Heights, a peaceful encampment erected by pro-Palestinian protesters was raided by police in late April, after university administrators called for external enforcement 2 days into the protests.
Tonight, NYPD officers descending on Columbia University, arresting dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters.
I'm just sitting here. Why are you doing this to me?
Police, some in riot gear, moving in.
Columbia's decision sparked intense backlash from people all over the country and triggered a nationwide debate on how colleges should handle protests against the war in Gaza, a conflict that has sown deep divisions in politics, classrooms, and households. With Columbia unwilling to divest from Israel, protesters broke in and camped out in a university building called Hamilton Hall. 2 days later, on a rainy Tuesday evening, they were forcibly removed by hundreds of police in a spectacle that shocked the world. That evening, I watched arrested students get bussed out of Morningside Heights, their masked faces pressed against the tinted windows as they passed their peers on the streets. On the other side of the street, I also watched several dozen police with batons and shields in their hand leave Columbia's campus, but it wouldn't be the last time.
We have protested the use of the university to support the war in Vietnam.
It wasn't so long ago when another generation of Columbia students organized similar encampments to protest the Vietnam War and the university's ties to South Africa. These movements also ended with clashes between protesters and police, but are now celebrated in Columbia's archives as brave acts of defiance. In the United States, the freedom to peacefully assemble is enshrined in the Constitution, but how authorities have pushed back on recent encampments is also related to the limits of public space. Under the First Amendment, peaceful, non-discriminatory protests are allowed on university grounds, but schools have the right to impose time, place, and manner restrictions on large gatherings and encampments, especially on campuses that fall in a gray area between public and private space. Experts I spoke with say these types of spaces give authorities leeway to police people who occupy them. They said that recent encampments are not protected under free speech because they are acts of civil disobedience. Universities can use the argument that protests are disrupting public order, and those putting their bodies on the line would risk arrest. So how does a country that believes in freedom of assembly allow room for peaceful protests? Well, it's tricky. Over the past few decades, the US has seen a gradual move towards the privatization of space because of a greater dependency on private capital to create public spaces. This has meant that there are fewer and fewer places for people to gather and make a significant impact without avoiding disruption. Some urban planners see this move towards privatization as a way to ensure order in public areas, but others see it as a need to create spaces that are more inclusive to this generation's needs. Some of the largest protests in recent memory have already started shaping urban design. In Washington, D.C., a 2-block-long pedestrian section in the heart of the city was renamed Black Lives Matter Plaza, after months of summer protests against the killing of George Floyd.
It's more fair and more just that Black lives and Black humanity matter in our nation.
The intersection where Floyd was killed in South Minneapolis has also turned into a public memorial, where people are invited to gather around murals and sculptures. This move to make urban design more inclusive has also been inspired by the removal of Confederate statues in squares and plazas across some southern states, so that people of different cultural groups and backgrounds feel more welcome in these shared spaces. As students wrap up their semesters and Columbia remains unwavering in its decision to keep ties to Israel, I'll be watching to see whether campus protests will spill out onto the streets, and how this might shape or change the urban landscape of New York City.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Now, Croatia is gearing up for its annual tourist bonanza, with the crowd set to descend on the Adriatic coast during the summer months. But the capital, Zagreb, is also seeing more visitors, and unlike the coastal resorts, it's got plenty of options on rainy days. Not least a collection of museums which have to be among the most eccentric in Europe. Want a museum of hangovers, torture or broken relationships? Zagreb's got one. And there are new institutions springing up all the time, as Monocle's man in the Balkans, Guy Deloney, has been finding out.
This is Zagreb's Museum of Hangovers, and this is the place to come if you want to explore your relationship with alcohol. There are parts of the exhibition here which deal with every bit of the standard night out, from the good times through to the morning after, and the fuzzy bits in between.
My name is Rino Dubokovic. I'm founder of the Museum of Hangovers. The first story in the museum that's highlighted, it's like the story of the bicycle pedal. We were in this local beer fest, and after this we went to the bar that was near. We talked about this, all these drunk stories and things like this. And my friend told how he woke up with the bicycle pedal. My idea was like, why there isn't like collection of all these stories and items, and that's how the idea started.
How is it that Zagreb has become the city of unusual museums? Because we have a Museum of Hangovers, Museum of Broken Relationships, Chocolate Museum, Torture Museum, Museum of Illusions, Museum of the 80s. You've even got the advert for it here, the Selfie and Memories Museum.
Yeah.
Why is all of this happening here?
I think it's a kind of thing that we have successful concepts that started like 10, 15 years ago. For this Museum of Broken Relationship, they were first one. And then Museum of Illusions, they now selling the franchises all over the world, like around 40, 50 franchises. So, lots of people are seeing them as an example. They are maybe thinking, okay, my neighbor have their own museum. I want to open my own.
So Zagreb is now Museum Startup Central.
Yeah, museum starts here.
You might think that a collection of quirky upstart museums would find themselves in conflict with traditional tourist attractions, but visitors seem to be happy to embrace a culturally omnivorous approach.
They usually consume them in addition to the traditional ones.
Lana Maric-Stimac is the president of Zagreb's Association of Tourist Guides.
They first go to the archaeological museum. They want to see something related to the history of the city. And then they also want to see something else, something unusual and something rare. They want to visit the Museum of Illusions, Museum of Broken Relationships. This is something that is not traditionally linked to the history, but it has a certain charm. Like, you see something that is very, very original and that cannot be found anywhere else but here.
Well, this is the one which started it all. It's the Museum of Broken Relationships, and it's been operating in this old building in the upper town of Zagreb since 2010. And as you walk in, you see all the residue, the detritus from relationships which didn't go the distance. I'm standing next to a red racing bicycle. There's a pair of boots next to that. Along the wall there's a character, a doll, from the Moomins, and as you go through, there's all sorts of weird and wonderful things that you can find, all of them curated by the team here, including one of the founders, Dražan Grubisic.
We start on the lighter note with the introductory stories that are short and funny and that kind of get you into this, and then the more you walk into the museum, we get into deeper and heavier and harder stories connected to family, loss, war, and then we, coming to the end, we go up again and finish on a lighter note or with the hopeful stories.
I'm just standing behind you. I can see a sign which says 27-year-old scab from my first love's wound. Imagine keeping such a thing.
Well, yeah, and the story is even funnier because she's a biologist or something, and she was madly in love, and at one moment she had a doubt of what would happen if something happened to him. So she decided she might take some physical part of him and maybe sometimes clone him. Isn't that a great idea? So that's what the scab is.
You call it a great idea, I call it distinctly odd. And she's not with him anymore because, of course, it's a broken relationship. I wonder why. That sounds to me like a narrow escape, frankly, and not for her.
Other meaningful exhibits include a plush Snoopy, an axe, and an espresso machine. In contrast to the content of the museum, relationships with the city authorities are positively cordial, and that goes for all the unusual institutions. Daria Dragoje is from Zagreb Tourist Board.
I'm not saying that classical museums, so to call them, are bad, but this diversity of the offer and the experience that they are offering to visitors is really something that attracts people to go to these museums and have a good time.
Do you ever have brainstorming sessions, Daria, where you sort of sit down and say, do you know what, the next museum we need is a museum of...
Well, it's not the way Zagreb Tourist Board functions.
This is fantasy time, Daria. Which one would you like to have set up in Zagreb?
Maybe the Museum of some colors and some light. We have also Festival of Lights with some light exhibitions and everything. I think that would be one very interesting point.
You heard it here first, and if it doesn't exist by the time you visit Zagreb, don't worry, there'll probably be another offbeat museum or three to choose from. For Monocle in Zagreb, I'm Guy Delaunay.
You're with the Curator, our weekly highlights show here on Monocle Radio, and I'm Carlotta Rebello. The Finnish company Wärtsilä is one of the world's largest engine makers for the marine and energy industries. The Wärtsilä Sustainable Technology Hub in the Finnish city of Vaasa is where the company develops future technologies such as greener engines. Our Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsov visited the hub and he brought us this report.
Often, when we talk about fighting climate change, the focus is on our actions as consumers. While that is important, a greener future is not possible if companies and industries don't change. It's a staggering fact that over 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions come from just 100 companies. Luckily, change is afoot in several industries, among them shipping and energy, due in no small part to the work that goes on here on Finland's west coast at Wärtsilä's Sustainable Technology Hub. You might not have heard the name Wärtsilä before, but the chances are that you've been on a ferry or a ship powered by their engines. It's a 190-year-old, €6 billion business that employs close to 18,000 people across nearly 80 countries. But let's hear it from Hannu Mäntymaa, Wärtsilä Finland's managing director.
Wärtsilä is known of its engines, what are, of course, producing energy and electricity. Big engines, over 20 megawatt, the biggest units and the world's biggest ships are having often our solutions and generating then the energy and electricity. Same in the power plants, in the land-based. We are more and more having their role to be a balancing power. So especially when the renewables are entering the field of energy systems, we need backup power when the wind is not blowing or sun is not shining. And there our solutions with the engine-based power plants are the key to enable the system staying stable and feasible to run.
The shipping industry has strict zero emissions targets to meet, which is why companies such as Wärtsilä have no time to waste. Developing greener engines is at the heart of what the company does.
Wärtsilä's strategy is really to shape the decarbonization of marine and energy. And that's all what we are actually doing here in the ST8, Sustainable Technology Hub here in Finland, in Vaasa. The key element of that is the future fuels, enabling the transition which will happen in the coming years and decades. For example, in marine, the IMO, International Maritime Organization, has set a target that 2050, the global shipping shall be in net zero emissions of greenhouse gases, which means that this transition to future fuels need to happen basically in one vessel lifespan. And that's what we are doing here, developing the future-proof solutions so that when a customer now buys and installs an engine into vessel, they can, in a flexible way, enable this transition to the future fuels during coming years. At the same time, we are also developing our digital solutions to continuously optimize how you run the power plant or how you operate the vessel. We have connected over 5,500 engines already real time around the globe into here, Sustainable Technology Hub here in Finland and Vaasa. And based on the data optimizing, we increase the AI, artificial intelligence. So actually this is the place where the dreams are coming really true, and we are driving the decarbonization to really reach the net zero.
Kai Portin is Wärtsilä's General Manager of Sustainable Fuels and Decarbonization. He tells me more about the kinds of engines that Wärtsilä is developing.
As I'm working in engines R&D, we are very much looking into new future fuels that will be net carbon free. And we have been testing here methanol, for example, green methanol. We have also been testing ammonia engine and all other like hydrogen for future operation in our engines.
And Wärtsilä makes engines for which industries?
Wärtsilä make engines both for land-based power plants and also for marine.
Okay, so just to sort of make it clear for our listeners, we are talking about really significant changes here. You know, shipping industry and energy industry and so on. If they turn to sustainable fuels on a global scale, we are talking about a very, very significant environmental change. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we want to show here and what we are doing is that we show we are not the bottleneck. We will provide the engines, the systems for the new fuels that are coming when they are coming with high efficiency and good robustness.
Portin has been with the company for nearly 3 decades and seen lots of ups and downs. Despite the challenges that still remain before the industries that Wärtsilä works with can reach net zero, his excitement about working for a more sustainable future is tangible.
Yeah, if you ask what our big hurdles are, they are small compared to others. The big hurdle is, of course, how to get the green alternative fuels to the right places with the right cost, produced in a sustainable way. After that, our part is easier. And of course, we all the time need to look at the efficiency, that we use as little fuel as possible. We need also to look at other emissions that are not global emissions, like NOx, SOx, and particulates, smoke, and so on, when we develop our engine. But hurdles for us are very small. They are more of happy challenges that we see. Yeah, it's the best time to be in R&D now. A lot of things are happening in the world and everybody wants change and need change, and we can provide it. So, yeah, I love it.
For Monocle in Vaasa, Finland, I'm Petri Burtsov.
Now, this was a week marked, of course, by this year's Eurovision Song Contest, and one of the most exotic entries was certainly Finland, with an act called Windows 95 Man. Our very own Eurovision correspondent, Fernando Agusapasheko, spoke to Windows 95 Man and his collaborator, Henri Pispanen.
Welcome Windows 95 man, and I only live by one rule, and the rule is no rules.
It's also me, Teemu Keisteri, and then it's Windows 95 man. It's just like a mega mix, like a Superman version of myself. Like it's give the permission to be no rules when I'm Windows 95 man. When I put the hot pants on, I'm always feeling like a happy, free man person.
I think this is very important, because we should all be free when we wear hot pants. And it's interesting because you come across as a man with no rules, but you are at Eurovision Song Contest, right? There are a set of rules. There are a lot of things you have to follow. How was it for you as an artist to do that as well?
This has been really crazy school for me to kind of, because Windows 95 man is more than 10 years old, so I'm using lots of improvisation and I love to break the rules. And with this project, I've been need to learn so much to follow all kind of like choreography and all kind of stuff. So it's something really, really, really interesting and really challenging mindset sometimes when there is a lot of technical stuff, and it's good practice to still like just focus to be yourself and not care about the small things, but because those doesn't matter.
All I can say, I like a rule breaker. But Henry, tell us, how did you meet actually Windows 95 man, and how did you guys work out with this contribution with your amazing vocals?
Well, at first I saw Windows 95 man at DJ gig. He didn't see me, but I'm aware of him. But we met actually through this project, and I was asked to produce the song. Then I did demo vocals, and apparently they were so good that I needed to
good.
But I want to talk about the music itself, Windows 95 man, because I feel that this dance music, Eurodance from the 90s, it's coming back. And you know, I was there as well in the 90s. I love this type of music. So what is your biggest music influences? Is that 90s Eurodance vibes, or tell us a bit more about your other music inspirations?
Yeah, I'm just all over the just 90s, all kind of Eurodance and rave and all the electronic music. Like everybody else was like kind of listening Finnish radio pop, but I went to libraries and find all kind of like Dutch hardcore techno and happy hardcore and like all the rave stuff and all the Eurodance. I always just was listening and be always just listening electronic music. So this is just like really natural way to go back to my childhood, and I had a happy childhood. So it's nice to be almost 40 and just live in nostalgia, because why not? If it makes me happy, why not?
Yes, we should chase happiness, I think.
Yeah.
And talking about happiness, I want to talk about both of your outfits. We spoke about yours, Windows 95 man, and that's very cool. I mean, so how is it going to work on the big day? Because I know it's Windows 95, but you can't really show the brand. So they might have to blur a little bit, or how does that work?
A couple of years ago, when I was performing in a Swedish national TV program where they're really strict with the brands. So I already had my studio like printed T-shirt with the pixelated Windows 95 logo. So it was like easy peasy. I was just like going to my studio. Okay, no worries. Let's use I have already this pixel man. So it was really easy decision. And then I think like my character there is so big power to give the joyness for the people. It's in the end, it doesn't matter so much what is in my shirt. So I can still give the energy out of me.
Absolutely. And Harry, I have to say, I have to commend you for your Danning usage. I think especially the short shorts, because short shorts are back for 2024 as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, a question to both of you. How was the reaction from Finland about your victory? Because the public loved it. I mean, I know Kadia announced the results. They're also very great, Kadia. But how the song is being perceived in Finland, and I want to know more about the local reaction.
Like a lot of emotions that it's separate people a little bit, like that you either love it or and then some people maybe hate it. I don't know. I haven't read in half year any news anymore or something like. But yeah, I don't know. It's. I'm just so happy. I'm seeing so many like kind of fan videos. Just today I saw like from Finnish countryside. Some library made some no rules video in the library where they breaks all the library rules, and it's so cute. It's so fantastic, and that gives me so much energy when like kind of people get my message, and it's been so this is so nice.
Yeah, and the denim egg was a word of the month in March, I guess, in Finnish.
It's a big egg. I mean, how big is it actually?
Yeah,
maybe like 3 meters,
something like that. Yeah,
even more.
Now, independent book publisher Galley Beggar Press aims to support writers of great literary talent who push the boundaries of form and language. Unfortunately, however, the increasing production and distribution costs are making it harder for smaller presses to support such writers. Co-founder Sam Jordison joined Georgina Godwin on Monocle on Saturday to break down how much it actually costs to make a book and the impact this has had on independent publishing.
We started in 2012. There are 2 of us, essentially, myself and my co-director and wife, Eloise Miller. And you've described very generously what we aim to do. And, you know, that was our aim from the start. We wanted to support writers of real talent. And we thought at the time, you know, that wasn't necessarily happening in the way we wanted to see it. So we got going with those principles, and we were very lucky, and we've always been very lucky. So it's quite strange to be here complaining in a way, because I'm also very conscious we've had wonderful luck with our writers who have won these prizes and done so well, and, you know, really become famous around the world, and with our readers who have supported us through these more than 10 years now. We've had fantastic people who subscribe to our books, buy them in advance, and have done all kinds of generous things for us. So it's mainly a story of actual good fortune and a lot of fun, because we love these books.
I am very interested in this breakdown you've published of production costs and profit margins of a typical book. Now, this is something you did in 2015, but you've updated it. Tell us what a book costs. Take us through the process.
Oh, well, I won't try and bore you with too many of the details, but essentially there are all kinds of costs involved in producing a book. I mean, most obviously there are the print costs, and these have more than doubled since that what now looks like a halcyon pre-Brexit time. So with the kind of numbers that we're doing, we're looking at costs of £2.50 to £3 per unit with the print costs, compared to £1 to £1.50 per unit back in 2015. And then there are all kinds of other costs, like, you know, cover design costs. Those have almost doubled for us, from £600 to £1,000. Typesetting costs, typesetting the invisible but crucial art of putting words on the page and making them look readable and beautiful. That's gone up on average from £300 to £500. And then there are all the other things involved in running a business. And I'm sure an awful lot of your listeners will know that so many things in life have gone up in recent years, you know, electricity, everything else. So it's become increasingly difficult.
And then, of course, the next part of the process is you're then getting these books into bookshops, and all the booksellers want a discount.
Yeah, they do. And, you know, of course they do, because they've got to make their money as well. But they ask for a lot. In short, you know, we're looking at 50 to 55%. If we're lucky, if bookshops buy in bigger numbers, that's wonderful, but then they start asking for even bigger discounts. So essentially more than half of the cover price of a book disappears right away when you're selling to bookshops.
And bookshops do it on sale or return. So even if the book's gone into the shop, it may yet come back to you.
Yeah, that's right. We have this very strange thing here in the UK that's essentially a hangover from the Second World War, when there were paper shortages, that bookshops can return the books they don't sell, and then you have to pay some of the money back to them. So, that can really take a big chunk out of what you thought were going to be your profits.
And tell us about distributors and their teams of representatives, because that costs. What are they doing exactly, and how much does it cost?
It's essentially breaks down about 25% again of the price. They're doing a lot of work for us. I mean, it's not like they don't earn their money. They do the logistics of getting the books into the shops. So that involves the warehousing, the lorries going up and down the country, all of this complicated stuff that, moving physical goods in the world is not easy. But they do a lot more than that. They also represent us to the bookshops. They have all kinds of conversations with them. They're the ones who get our books in front of booksellers, essentially, and persuade them to take them on and to get them interested. And, they're this vital part of the chain before the other really vital part where booksellers press the books into readers' hands. So we desperately need that.
What about royalties for authors?
Yeah, again, if listeners are keeping up, you'll be hearing that more and more of the cover price is disappearing, and of course authors have to be paid. It's absolutely vital, and that's why we're here. Eloise and myself, we are writers too, so we are very keen that authors get a fair shake. So they have to have royalties, which there are all kinds of complications in how they're paid, but essentially for us we have an escalating royalty system, which for the first 3,000 copies the authors are sold, are given 10% of the net price. So that's after various discounts and things. Then it goes up to 12.5% on 5,000, 15% when they sell over 5,000, because they're on an escalator, because that takes into account all of those production costs I was talking about before, and the cost of designing the covers and all of those things. So once they sell more, we can afford to give them more. And we love paying our authors, but again, it takes away from the profit margin.
And finally this week, Sophie Monahan-Coombs explores the places where community is built through food, with two writers featured in a new book, London Feeds Itself.
So we always have rice, that's a non-negotiable, as well as Chinese soup, which is not like the kind of soup you would know in the West. So Chinese soup is always a kind of bone broth-based clear broth with lots of fresh vegetables and changing ingredients. And then it's based around donations that the centre gets. So this might be donated vegetables from an Asian wholesaler. There's always a meat option, something that's probably quite vegetarian friendly. Sometimes there's steamed fish, tofu. It really depends, and it's very much up to the chef to decide as well. But what is crucial is that these dishes provide a taste of home to the community members. And it's often stuff that I think you would not get anywhere else, and certainly not in any Chinese restaurant in the UK.
And Barclay, I want to bring you in. So your essay focuses on kind of two venues. Maybe firstly, you could just introduce what they are.
Yeah, so I was writing about Polish clubs, and these existed from about, after World War II, basically to preserve Polish identity in the UK. During World War II, many Poles came over, and actually in the Battle of Britain, many Polish pilots fought. And these clubs kind of existed to preserve Polish identity at a time when people couldn't return to Poland because of the Iron Curtain. And what I was looking at was how that identity was kind of preserved in aspic, and how Poland, obviously went through the Soviet era and then independence and how Poland had kind of moved on. And then in 2004, so coming up in May, we have the 20-year anniversary of Poland's accession to the EU. And suddenly we had this huge influx of 1 million Poles who arrived in the UK, and they became the second largest diaspora for almost a 20-year period, though they're now leaving. And it's about this kind of meeting between these two visions of Poland. So the Polish identity that came over with these, like enterprising Poles in sort of 2004, economic migrants who were seeking a better life in Britain and to make money and then return back to Poland, and the Poland that had kind of existed in these clubs to preserve a Poland that no longer existed. And one of the key venues I write about is Ognisko, which is it's called the Polish Hearth, and it's the longest standing Polish club. It was actually the seat of the Polish government in exile during the war and then afterwards. And my grandfather was the Polish Minister for Health in exile. So he used to work there. And so my dad actually grew up going to Ognisko, and my dad is now in his 70s. And we've sort of celebrated every major life event at the restaurant at Ognisko, including his 70th birthday a few years ago. So it's a really special place to me, and the food is actually unbelievably good.
You mentioned your father there, and you talk in the essay about how he's kind of reclaimed his Polish identity over time. How has that interlinked with food?
Growing up, my dad would talk about Poland, and it was kind of present, but it wasn't a core tenet, I would say, of his identity. He felt sort of very European. He met my mum in Italy. My mum is Swiss. So we kind of had this sort of Central European kind of vibe in the house, but it was never specifically from anywhere. And then with Brexit, my dad suddenly was like, whoa, I don't really recognize this place, even though he's been here, the vast majority of his life. And suddenly he felt this massive disconnect. And if he wasn't British in that sense, he feels very much like a Londoner, which is also how I feel. And suddenly he felt this kind of disconnect and rejection. And so he applied for his Polish passport, and he got it last year. And I actually found out yesterday that I got my Polish citizenship as a result. So this is a well-timed interview. But what I started to notice was the second that my dad kind of had this switch in himself that, okay, what am I? I'm Polish. Suddenly I would open the fridge whenever I would go home, and there'd be cabanos, there'd be sleds, there'd be all of these cheeses, cheesecakes, poppy seed cake. There'd be all of these ingredients. And I realized he'd basically stopped going to regular supermarkets. He now only went to the Polski Sklep, and he was only buying Polish ingredients. And then I would hear him suddenly, having never really heard him speak Polish growing up, every time a builder would be in the vicinity, not even doing anything to do with us, my dad would go and speak to them in Polish. And suddenly it was like, this unfurling of layers that I had never really seen before. And it's always a really interesting thing, right? When you realize that your parents have had these big lives before your existence, and you get a sudden insight into it. And so somewhere in him had always been this Polish man waiting to find its expression. And now, I live in the shadow of that, which is really nice.
Well, that's all we've got time for on this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Carlotta Ribello. Join us again next week to hear some of the very best of the programmes across Monocle Radio. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.